The thing I talk about most often on this show is philosophy. And as I have explained before, one of the main purposes of philosophy is to find happiness. It's a very large statement, and it isn't always true. It isn't true of all philosophies. But it is a basic idea, especially of the early philosophers, of trying to really solve the problem that life on earth is hard. Religion tries to solve that problem. Philosophy, similarly, tries to understand a kind of a bigger reality, either about the cosmos itself or simply about our human experience. In fact, philosophy often deals with how to be a more satisfied or happy human being without necessarily taking a cosmological view that says the world is created this way or that there are gods in charge of you or anything like that. It doesn't necessarily go there. To use an example, I talk about the Stoics a lot, and I'm going to talk about them tonight as well. And the most famous of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, actually was quite a religious man. Occasionally in his work, you see the mention of God and religion, but basically it doesn't really inform very much of his philosophy. Philosophy is about living better as a human being amongst other human beings. So, in a nutshell, philosophy helps us on the quest for happiness, the ever elusive state that even once we find it, it's very hard to keep it. I mean, Aristotle said, it seems clear that happiness needs the addition of external goods, which is an interesting thought. He's really saying happiness needs money. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. Money, wealth, and its relationship to our happiness and contentment. I mean, we live in a time, as most times really, where the financial challenges and poverty far outweigh the satisfaction or comfort of people at large. We all know the 1%, and the truth is that is something that has never changed. So certainly, one of the questions that is always fed in to the question of happiness is happiness only possible if you have money? Going on with Aristotle, he says, it is difficult, if not impossible, to do fine deeds without any resources. Many can be done, as it were, by instruments, by the help of friends, or wealth, or political influence. Certainly sounds like he's talking about our familiar world. It's quite a bold statement to say it is difficult or impossible to do fine deeds without these things. And perhaps that's one of the questions we need to consider. Is it possible to do the things you want to do that better your life and better the world and better the lives of others if you don't have resources, or at the very least, people and influence? We won't necessarily answer that question, but what I would like to do is look at the issue of money and wealth and its relationship to our quest for happiness. The French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived in the 18th century, pretty much just before the French Revolution, and who was a major influence on it, was very perturbed by inequality in wealth. And he's probably one of the seeds of later Marxism that would, 100 years or more after him, really start becoming influential. I'm not going to go into history, politics, and philosophy here, about which I only know a limited amount anyway, but really concentrate on the ideas which Rousseau and others have asked us to look at. Rousseau said, the first man who, having fenced in a piece of land, said, "This is mine," and found people naive enough to believe him, this man was the true founder of civil society. from how many crimes and wars and murders, from how many horrors and misfortunes might not any one have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows, beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself belongs to nobody. Very many people these days appreciate the significance and the profundity of those words, even if you aren't, Marxist inclined or whatever you might think that really relates to. Because he's really talking about greater equality. And the key factor, the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth belongs to nobody. And what makes civil society is the first genius who thought, I'll just make it mine. And so we get society as we know it, which has been around, for generations upon generations, where it seems normalized, having and have not, and the aspiration to wealth. And we look back throughout history and we see that it's always there. Although Obama, when he was the president, said that economic inequality is the defining challenge of our time. He was right, but it's of every time. Because at least one way of looking at it is that extreme inequality that characterizes human society and seems to have pretty much always characterized human society is what is one of the primary sources of our unhappiness. It's not per se the lack of wealth, because we know that wealth doesn't make you happy, but it's that extreme difference, that mine versus not yours, that makes this difficult life. Because then it becomes about competition, and it becomes about war, as Rousseau said, and murder. And all the things we do to each other like that are primarily about wealth and having or have not. Plato said, the form of law which I propose would be as follows. In a state which is desirous of being saved from the greatest of all plagues, not factions, but distractions, there should exist amongst the citizens neither extreme poverty nor excessive wealth, for both are productive of great evil. And the legislator should determine what is to be the limit of poverty or wealth. That is a very important foundational argument in those philosophers who argue that it's the inequality which drives social ills and human unhappiness, and that we really should have a situation, a government, which creates a better balance between have and have not, something which would be picked up by later philosophers, and in fact, of course, all the way through our Stoics to Rousseau and modern times. Rousseau himself said, one of the most important tasks of government is to prevent extreme inequality of fortunes. He's trying to get to the unhappiness. It's not just about resources, it's about how it actually creates this human unhappiness. He was living at a time when capitalism was just developing, really, in the mid-18th century, and where international banking was becoming the big thing, and he could see that manufacturing and banking and these things would make some people wealthy and some people poor. Remember, living at the time of just before the French Revolution, that's the historical example of the extreme inequality that eventually led to revolution based on that. Although the American Revolution was earlier than that, wasn't based on economic difference, that was based on political differences. But the French one was certainly, as we all know, inspired by the extreme poverty of the citizens as opposed to the great wealth of the ruling class. But to Rousseau, as I've said, while that is important and the politics of it is significant, what his concern with was the human being, the soul. He worried about the effects of economic inequality on the soul. He said that tremendous wealth will enfeeble the conscience. Wealthy people don't have strong consciences. They don't strongly care what they do to the world or what they do to the other. He says we are social animals. We're always driven to distinguish ourselves from others or to prove ourselves better than others, but that doesn't have to be destructive. He said you can have distinctions for the right reasons. You can have civic and sociable behavior that makes you admirable, and that is not destructive to the world. In fact, positive action that benefits your society might make you seem better than others, but it's clearly not a way that is destructive to the world. But he says society rewards distinction with wealth and makes wealth a distinction worthy of respect. So if you do great things, you get lots of money poured onto you, and that then says, oh, the wealthy are doing fantastic things, so having lots of money is a reason to be respected. And that persists very strongly to our day. Sometimes automatically great wealth makes someone seemingly extremely respectable. So society rewarding with wealth makes wealth worthy of respect itself. And then, as Rousseau points out, status then is not just owed to your wealth, but to your wealth relative to the poverty of others. And that, he said, would lead in an unequal society to the rich having a pleasure of dominating others. That makes them, he said, like those ravenous wolves, which once they have tasted human flesh, scorn all other food, and from then on only want to devour men. So he says wealth degrades our minds and makes us addicted not only to the pleasure of wealth itself, but to the pleasure of domination without justice or fairness or any other value which we would like to define us. And he said society can't stand on those foundations. It sounds like he's talking in extremes, but he's talking very realistically, because the proof is in the world around us as we look at that. And it's not always as raw as perhaps Rousseau is making it sound, but he certainly is accurate in his depiction of a society that ends up valuing wealth itself as a distinguishing feature. And the whole argument that we still have in the world today is that the wealthy, because of how and why they acquire and hold onto those resources, in the end will be harmful to other human beings and to society itself. When we look at the Stoics back in the 5th century and earlier in Rome, Seneca, who was one of the great Stoics, and he was probably Rome's wealthiest man during his life, he famously said, "Is it not madness and the wildest lunacy to desire so much when you can hold so little? It is folly to think that it is the amount of money and not the state of mind that matters." Which, interesting, and he's often criticized because he was so wealthy himself, but he was clearly able to see the problems. The kind of founder of Roman Stoicism, Epictetus, went as far as to say, it is better to die of hunger with distress and fear gone than to live upset in the midst of plenty. So he says, what use is your wealth if you experience distress and fear, all of those things that wealth often generates. And wealth often generates the fear of losing wealth. And so then you're living with fear. So you might have lots of money, but you live with fear. And we see that all around us all the time. The more you have, the more you worry about losing it. Speaking again to his friend who was planning on giving up studying so that he could just start working and getting some money. 4th century Rome, but it doesn't sound any different to our world, and probably wasn't that much so. But he says, what you wish to attain by postponing your studies is that poverty may not have to be feared by you. But what if it is something to be desired? Riches have shut off many a man from the attainment of wisdom. Poverty is unburdened and free from care. When the trumpet sounds, the poor man knows that he is not being attacked. When there's a cry of fire, he only seeks a way of escape. He doesn't ask, what do I need to save? Similarly, of course, when he hears the noise and the trumpet sounds, there's people coming, he doesn't have to cling to save his possessions because he doesn't have any. So Seneca does propose a classic Stoic technique of visualizing how it should be, visualizing losing everything or not having everything as a way of being able to accept it when it gets here. He actually advocated practicing poverty. He said, appoint certain days on which to give up everything and make yourself at home with next to nothing. Start cultivating a relationship with poverty, for no one is worthy of God unless he has paid no heed to riches. I'm not, mind you, against your possessing them, but I want to ensure that you possess them without tremors. And this you will only achieve in one way, by convincing yourself that you can live a happy life even without them, and by always regarding them as being on the point of vanishing. The real bottom line of all of that is learning to appreciate what you have, imagining yourself not having it so that you can be okay when it's gone, and remembering that you can and will live a happy life without them. So at the very least, we can take the kind of Marie Kondo approach and trying to minimize, reduce, look at the things in your life and keep on asking yourself, what deserves to have space, what doesn't, what can I let go of? Which is a difficult process because we live in a world that keeps on telling us that you can acquire happiness by buying stuff you don't need. We are bombarded by advertising and social manipulation and all sorts of mental manipulation that keep on making us want to buy things we don't have. Even if you witness the endless upgrading of phones, the ultimate buying what you don't have because you already have one. You have the best model. When a year later they'll tell you, no, that phone is rubbish, you need this one. And a year later they'll tell you, no, that phone was rubbish, you need this one. And we fall for it every time. And we start predicating our happiness on the right phone. And that is, at the very least, a great symbol for how we get caught up and addicted to the idea that I'll be happy when I have that thing. That's really what is at the bottom of all that advertising. I'll be happy when I have that thing. And the Stoics say that we should live simply. Seneca takes it to the extreme by saying practice poverty 1 day a week, which is interesting. But Musonius, who I've spoken about before, says that what really happens is that by having a lot of money and we develop a taste for luxury, and that includes food and everything else, and we lose the ability to eat and enjoy the simplest things. Musonius was the one that says, eat fruit, vegetable, and cheese. That's it. And we'll be fine. But we've created this idea of needing all this variety and so on. And of course, we don't, because luxury requires effort, constant effort, and time and resources and all of those things which are wasted on seeking delightful things instead of seeking the happiness itself. There isn't a philosophy against wealth in Stoicism. There isn't an injunction against it, but there is the suggestion that wealth should be used to better mankind, to better your community or your environment, maybe by teaching people or influencing them positively. So the idea of wealth to the Stoics is to use it to the benefit of yourself and those around you. But enjoyment must be thoughtful. Part of what then traps us into acquiring acquisitiveness is that enjoyment, which takes the form of satisfaction. So if I get that phone or whatever it is I desire, I feel satisfied. Satisfaction ends desire. We want what we don't have, and once we have it, we're satisfied. But satisfaction is not a lasting feeling. It goes away. It's replaced again by desire, and what we want comes back to haunt us again. But it's a bit bigger, and it's a bit stronger, and so we want it even more. We want something even better and bigger. We never seem to be satisfied, and then that is fueled and fed by the way our society is structured, which is really for the wealthy to try and acquire as much wealth as they can. That becomes a vicious cycle of we never feel satisfied, we always need more, and society, of course, feeds that in us. So there are things we can try and do. There's Seneca's efforts of practicing poverty and try not indulging for a day and not buying stuff and not depending on those material satisfactions. We can also do things like, instead of acquiring, give away. So give away something that you hold dear. You don't have to give it away permanently. You can give it to someone else to keep if that worries you. Or you can just not use it. Lock it away for a week. Imagine locking your phone away for a week. Well, we've also become so dependent on that device to run our lives that it's easy to find an excuse not to. But anyway, find something you love, give it away or lock it away or let a friend look after it, and then see what happens when you get it back. Firstly, of course, you'll be happy to get it back. You don't really then want anything new. You want that thing back, and it helps you appreciate what you have. You might forget about it. Weeks might go by. It's like if you wait long enough, you won't even know that you don't have it. And that's another great thing to try. Whatever it is, put it away, give it away, and kind of try and forget about it for a while. And you'll see that you quickly adapt to not having it. You really can ask yourself, do I then need this? Or maybe someone else would benefit from this more than I do. Do this for everything you think you can't live without, and in time you'll start changing your whole perspective of things, and you'll probably end up a little bit wealthier. So finally, our friend Epictetus says, the fault is not in the wealth, but in the mind itself. That which had made poverty a burden to us, the mind, has made riches also a burden. Just as it matters little whether you lay a sick man on a wooden or a golden bed, for either way he will carry his illness with him. One does not need to care whether the diseased mind is bestowed upon riches or upon poverty. The disease is in the man. The disease is attachment. Remember, he says, that it is not the desire for wealth and possession that debates and subjugates us. It's the desire for peace, for leisure, for travel, for learning. It's desire. It doesn't matter, he says, what the external thing is. The value that we place on it subjugates us to another. Where our heart is set, there our impediment lies. As soon as we want something or someone, that becomes our weakness. Stop wanting, we stop becoming attached. It becomes irrelevant whether we acquire wealth or not. In fact, it's preferable that we don't, and perhaps that's where happiness lies.